Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we're here to bring you more knowledge, more light, and more love. Incredible guest this week. We're going to be talking with a man named R.E.Kretz about the Alchemical Search for the Unified Field and so much more. That's the new book that he wrote. It's absolutely incredible. We're going to be talking to him. It's going to be mind-blowing. The Philosopher's Stone, so much more. But first, I need you to do something for me. Follow me on Instagram at midnight_on_earth. That is the address. You can follow me there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you go to get your podcasts, click that button that connects us so you know exactly what's going on in real time. You get that notification when someone as incredible as R.E.Kretz comes on the show, just like all of our incredible guests. You get that text or perhaps message to your Neuralink, depending on when you're listening to this. Not sure, but that's what happens. And of course, tell a friend, tell someone that you know that loves these type of podcasts. You know them, you know their frequency, you know my frequency. Match our frequencies for me. Help me get there. Bring them here, midnightonearth.com. Okay, so we are about to talk to author, shaman, Freemason, so many different things. R.E.Kretz, we're about to talk to him, but first I need to read his bio. So here we go. R.E.Kretz has worked in the telecommunications and IT industries, and in the 1970s, he studied transcendental meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and later spent 3 years with a Native American shaman. He was raised to the degree of a Master Mason and has served as Master of a Lodge, as well as holding many leadership roles within the Knights Templar. His recent book, which we are going to be discussing today, is called The Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, Pythagorean, Hermetic, and Shamanic Journeys into Invisible and Ethereal Realms. So, and currently, he's in Churchill, Tennessee, and he's here with us now. Hello, Richard.
Hey, how you doing, Jake?
Thank you so much for joining us. Incredible book. We're going to have a deep, deep conversation, I feel like. So tell me, what is the motivation of writing this book? Where did you get the inspiration?
Well, I could give you all kinds of canned stuff. It's like, all right. Well, I read the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, and Robert Langdon, who's a symbologist. He was inspirational, of course. And then you could talk about Carlos Castaneda and the Yaqui Way of Knowledge with his sorcerer, Don Juan, and you put them two together, and that's kind of what I do. But the real inspiration was that I had questions. I had a lot of questions. And, I embarked on this quixotic quest, and I wasn't chasing after windmills to find answers. And I was hoping that Masonry would be a vehicle to do that, but it was just like Don Quixote had. It turned out to be a mule. Okay, but aside from that, I had all these questions. And so I was trying to find answers, and it seemed every which way I turned, everyone I spoke to, I wasn't getting satisfactory responses. Most of the time, it was something that was biblical, or it was an existential, philosophical thing, and I don't have much tolerance for that. So, as you found out earlier, I'll call you out on it. But I decided, well, I've got to saddle up and do this on my own. So I started reading voraciously, and digging through tons of books, looking, everywhere I could on the internet. If I had a question, I would write it down and I would seek out the answer. And oftentimes in my research, I would find that the answers I was looking for were not what folks were telling me they were. So it's like, there's got to be a reason for that. But the bottom line, the reason I wrote this book is because if I had questions, I knew folks like you had the same questions. And if I had invested all this time and effort in getting answers, why should I say, well, Jake, you need to go out and do your own work, figure it out for yourself. No, because a lot of people don't really know how to even begin, let alone where to look for answers like this, when we're talking about the esoteric and the occult. So I felt I had an obligation to share my knowledge with those that were also on this path seeking illumination.
So this is your aggregated, accumulated knowledge up until this point. You feel like this book, which came out in July of 2023, is really the summation of everything you've learned that you can share with other people.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
You can't concentrate a lifetime of knowledge into a few pages. And if you read the book, you will find that it is very, very chock full of information. It's very condensed. They're concentrated. It's not a whole lot of flowery prose. It gets right into, the heart of things, the operative mechanics. Okay, how does this darn thing work? What is it? Along with the explanations. And then we combine that later on towards the end with the shamanic experience of how do we apply it to our daily life? And in that regard, my teacher used nature to impart life lessons for me to understand the meaning of our existence, of death and rebirth.
So that's the alchemical search, you would say. And then what is the unified field?
Well, the unified field, is something that is alluded to. I really don't discuss it in depth in this book because that'll be covered off in another book that'll be coming out probably in about 2 years.
Yeah, sneak preview, people.
But yeah, sneak preview. But the Philosopher's Stone actually, as you and I had discussed pre-show, has 3 attributes. The first portion of it is transformation, which involves alchemy, and that's what alchemy is all about. It's a process of transformation, whether it's physical or spiritual. And then we look at the other attributes of the Philosopher's Stone, one of which is immortality, and immortality alludes to time. So the question really is when we're speaking of immortality, can we also simultaneously be referring to travel in the space-time continuum, looking at it as a time as a 4th dimension, in addition to the 3 spatial dimensions. And then we're also looking at the third attribute, which would be the elixir of life. And we have to define, okay, well, what is the elixir of life? And how does that, play into all of this with regards to the Philosopher's Stone? The elixir of life, it seems to be a vehicle for panspermia. Okay, in other words, seeding life on other worlds. And all of this comes out of a geometric model of the Philosopher's Stone that, in a 2-dimensional form is usually what folks envision as the symbol of it, where you have a circle containing a triangle containing a square that has another circle, and there may or may not be something inside that interior circle. That's similar to what it actually is. But if we extrapolate that out and look at it in a 3-dimensional aspect, and that's the whole thing about working with the occult, the esoteric, we have to learn how to see beyond,
Yes.
not just what is in front of us, but, you know, and this is more than just shifting our world paradigms. We have to eliminate the construct of the box that we have been functioning in. We have to get rid of all of that so that our vision will become much broader and we can see beyond. We have to just, think well beyond the box itself, get rid of the box. So, in a three-dimensional aspect, we're looking at this model of the stone as the five Platonic solids that Pythagoras actually discussed. And we find that, yes, we have not just Western occultism, Hermeticism, okay? We are also looking at Eastern mysticism through Vedic science. Everything, becomes blended into one. You can't, all they are these different modalities. They're, if you really take and look at them side by side, they're expressing essentially the same thing, only they're coming at it from different directions, different points of view. So there is this overlap. They're essentially the same thing. And that's what, so for someone to get hung up on, say, okay, Hermeticism, this is the only way that we can really look at it, or, the Eastern mystics saying, okay, it's purely Vedic science, or if it's shamanic, which is nature-based, it's all essentially the same thing. It's just like with, the various religions throughout the world. The core message of all of them is a discussion of caring for one another. It's all about love.
Yes.
And charity. And charity is nothing more than love in action.
Service, exactly. And this is what you're talking about when you're saying the Philosopher's Stone. It's not really this specific stone, but it's a concept, it's a core set of functions within the deepest part of spirituality that shows up in every culture around the world.
Right. And what I'm trying to share in this book is that the stone resides within each of us.
Yes.
So what I am trying to do is explain, okay, it's kind of like a how-to. This is, the operative mechanics of how it really works so that you can understand it. And then once we understand how it works, then we can actually put it to use, and benefit from it. And that's the whole idea behind all of this. It's not to get all philosophical, because that's a waste of your time and my time. If you want philosophy, there's tons of books out there on philosophy. The thing about philosophy is great about asking questions, but it rarely ever answers them.
That's true.
I'm here to provide you with answers. And that's what this book does.
So in your book, you talk about how a quest for the Philosopher's Stone is a quest for the Grail. So how are they related? Is that the same thing?
Again, it's a matter of perspective. Do you really want to say that the Philosopher's Stone is the Grail? Yeah, you can say that. It's, what your personal take is on it. What do you really want it to be? And that's the whole thing. We see what we want to see and we believe what we want to believe, and that's who we are. I can't say, Jake, this is specifically, whatever an object happens to be, because when you see it, you might see it as something else, or that it might be capable of doing something else. So to say that the Grail is the Philosopher's Stone, yes, we can say that, because when we're in search of the Grail, from an alchemical perspective, is seeking a higher level of consciousness. I mean, we can get back into the Arthurian stories, where we have Sir Gawain, who is going out and he actually sees the Grail, but he doesn't recognize it for what it is. initially. He fails to ask a question, or excuse me, that was Percival. So, years later, he's still questing to find it again. And once he does, and he remembers to ask the question, King Arthur is healed. The land is healed. Camelot returns. So you can say, yes, in that regard, the Grail is about transformation. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. This is just one example of how this concept of the Philosopher's Stone is transmuted and changed to different cultures. But the crux, the idea is the same of what they're going after, that higher level of consciousness, truly like the new earth, like Eckhart Tolle talks about.
Oh, yes. And if you've read Eckhart Tolle, he will tell you that this process of transformation, metamorphosis, it's a very painful. And that's one of the things that you're told about within Vedic science as you're looking at how do we attain that higher level of consciousness? How do we attain what we refer to as enlightenment? Well, we have to, first of all, as Toll would say, burn off our ego. We have to divest ourselves of the superfluities of life. We have to realize, we have to go through this pain and this suffering. It's just like when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon. It's not a very pleasant experience for that caterpillar, to go through this metamorphosis. But later on, he emerges to become a beautiful butterfly, So, and that's what we're looking at here. There's a lot of pain and suffering involved. So as you go through life and you come on hard times, it's part of this metamorphosis, because if you can endure and persevere, experience those difficult times, and you're able to get through it, you'll have greater compassion for someone that is going through it, that is going down that same path that you have. So you have this sense of understanding because you've experienced where they are at, and you know what it's like. And even after you've come through this, and become better than you once were, you don't forget it. And that's why I say, you become more compassionate, more charitable. You're more willing to reach out. Most importantly, you're looking beyond yourself. It's all about looking beyond. That's the whole thing here. And it's like the microcosm. We are a microcosm within the macrocosm of the universe.
Right.
We're so consumed and centered on ourselves. As human beings, we're very narcissistic. And that's just the way it is. We're all about us. But as you go through this process, you realize that individually, we really aren't that important, that our concerns aren't just for us individually, but for us collectively, moving us, as a species, as a planet, as life forward. Because if we can take that approach, everything benefits. And that's really what it's all about when it comes to finding our place in the universe, to become one with the universe. And if you're familiar with the universal principles, Hermetics, one of the first principles is that of mentalism. And mentalism is that the all is part of everything, and everything is part of the all. It's a matter of oneness.
Yes, and we can evolve together by contributing each lifetime. You talk in your book about reincarnation, and I think the point that you're trying to make here is that our lives should be dedicated to service for the greater forward progression of the human experience. When we're here as humans, and I've talked to people that are essentially on their deathbed, just dying, and they feel like their entire life went by in 5 minutes. Their perception of time has shifted in such a way that their entire life, all their experiences up until that moment seem like such a short amount of linear time. So with that in mind, we have 5 minutes here. So the only thing we can do or should do as high frequency beings, as spiritual beings, is dedicate our lives to service to help move forward. Because you know what? We're going to be back anyway. You're going to be back experiencing the work that you did.
Exactly. And this goes way back. And if you're looking at, authority figures, we can take and look at the Prince of Wales as an example. Do you know what the motto is for the Prince of Wales?
No.
Ich dien.
Okay.
It's German for I serve.
Oh.
And it comes back to what you were talking about before. It's the idea of selfless service. In order to lead, we must first be able to serve.
Yes, absolutely. And service with the intention of giving, not expecting anything in return. Of course, there's energetic laws in place that the energy that you put out will come back to you. But if you dedicate your life to service, to utilizing your talents, discovering them, and then applying them to your service, you're going to have the best life anyway, and you're giving back. It's that you're in the flow of the universe, of life itself.
Exactly. And that's why there's this, movement, towards charity among those that are more fortunate, because, and they're not necessarily, you do have folks that say, okay, yeah, I made this donation, I give to charity, and they're seeking, recognition or some benefit, even if it's a tax deduction. They're looking for some recognition, some sense of reward, some benefit. But then you have, I think, the majority of folks that make charitable contributions, and they make them anonymously, because they're truly not seeking the recognition or the reward. Their reward is in helping others.
Yes.
And that's really what the best reward that you can actually have.
Well, this is the illusion. We're literally living in a 3-dimensional illusion that's both real and unreal at the same time. I don't know how it could be that way, but it is. And after we leave here, those actions, those are the things that are going to matter. That's what carries over. That's what binds to the soul as the soul progresses from lifetime to lifetime.
Oh, exactly. Unless we're in a holographic video game, and somebody hits the great reset.
It's like, I tripped over the plug. Oops.
Yeah.
I was just having this discussion about this. Tell me what you think. One indicator. Now, I don't believe we're living in a simulation. I do believe we exist within the mind of the all, but an alien computer simulation, I'm not sold on. However, the biblical stories of Moses and the Jews traveling through Egypt, and then manna appearing out of nowhere and feeding them and sustaining them. Where did that come from? That seems like something that would happen in a video game where your character is about to die. You hit this button and then they get this food and they are able to continue their quests.
Oh, we could have a wonderful discussion about all this. I don't think this is going to be today will not be the forum for that. All I will say is, I'm not saying it's the aliens, but it's the aliens.
Well, of course, that's the next time you're on this show. That is where we will go, my friend. Okay, so tell me more about alchemy, though, because a lot of people hear this term and they think about medieval kind of early scientists trying to turn material lead into material gold. But then they also hear about how it's metaphorical, where it's actually an enlightenment process where you're the lead and you're turning yourself into spiritual gold. But there's even more to that. Can you tell us more about alchemy?
Okay. Well, it's time to get the hip waders on. Alchemy, that's a scary word because folks generally just don't have an understanding of it. It basically is an ancient word for chemistry.
Right.
Chem refers to ancient Egypt, and al refers to God. So it's basically just it's chemistry. We'll keep it simple.
Sure.
Okay. What does it involve? Okay. In its essence, it's a process of transformation. Okay. In that regard, we can look at it in the way that most people perceive it. And the initial one is that it is changing lead into gold from a physical perspective. Okay, that's how we're going to approach this first, from a physical transformation perspective, changing lead into gold. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible if you have a nuclear reactor, because you have to change the atomic structure of lead to make it something that it is not. Okay. Even though lead and gold, I think, are only maybe 3 or 4 atomic numbers apart, their characteristics, their properties are very different. So, were the ancient alchemists really talking about that kind of a transformation? No, they were not. Not really. What they were discussing was the refinement of galena. Now, galena is a raw lead ore. And it, as a raw lead ore, instead of an element, it's imbued with a lot of impurities. Galena is a primary source for silver. It also has trace amounts of gold in it. So that's where we're getting into this alchemical process, this transformation. It's a refinement, kind of like a synonym for transformation is refinement. Okay. It's just like with the fossil fuels, we refine oils. We're transforming or petroleum products. But anyway,
Sure.
So what do they do? In this process, you take this raw galena, this raw lead ore, and you heat it up in an apparatus that's kind of like a double Dutch oven. It cooks it down, and you burn off all of the impurities. Noxious gases are escaping as this thing is cooking, and you've got some sulfides that are combined with mercury vapors, very, very poisonous. And this is where you hear about incidents in alchemy, because if you inhale that stuff, it's going to kill you really quick. So you have to be very, very careful, pay close attention to detail. So you've got these gases that are being emitted. And as you're burning this stuff down, you end up with nothing but a little pile of ash. And in the middle of all of this, you end up with this chunk of pure lead. And on this lead is a white powder. That white powder is referred to as a bullion. And within that bullion, you've got some other impurities, but it's mostly silver with trace amounts of gold in it. And these trace amounts of gold are referred to as salts. And salts can mean a number of things within chemistry, but in this regard, it's referring to a minuscule amount. I mean, very small amounts of gold. So that's the first portion of the process. So you've got all the galena, you've burned off the impurities, but you're not done yet. You do have your piece of pure lead that you were able to get out of it. You scrape off this white powder, but to get the silver and the gold, you have to distill that further. So that's another portion of the process. And you go through this whole thing, and ultimately you separate the silver out, burn off some more impurities, and you have just a few little grains of gold that you're able to get out of it. So it's a refinement process, and it's far more practical than to say, oh, I'm going to do, change up the atomic structure of one element to another. It just didn't quite work like that. They didn't have that capability back then. So that's the first aspect. And the process of burning something off, you take your product, your substance, and burning it off, okay, getting rid of most of the impurities and then distilling it down further is the essence of really what alchemy is when it comes to a transformation. So that's how we apply it to changing lead into gold. We can move forward into spagyrics. I believe I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, spagyrics. Actually, we've had
spagyrics.
Feral Fungi, Jason Scott, the leader in spagyrics, his company Feral Fungi, they make some of the most incredible products out there. And I was thinking about him right when you said that.
Yeah. Well, was he a fun guy?
He's a very fun guy.
Okay. So, spagyrics, the process is the same. And how does that essentially works? Well, he probably shared a lot about that with you.
Yes.
In that, but I'm going to elaborate on it and take you someplace that you weren't expecting. Okay. So part of that process, you're dealing in spagyrics with plants. Flowers, plants, the roots, bark, all that kind of good stuff. And in that process, one of the things that you hear referring to is deadheading. Okay. So you go out in the pre-dawn morning and you go collect these flower tops that still have the dew on. And that's called deadheading. And you put them in a sealed container for a while, and then you cook them down and until they're black. And what you're trying to do is get the oils off of the essential oils off of them. So, that's how that portion of the process is done. It's the same thing where you're going to try and burn something down, and then you're going to distill what remains to make it even more pure. And this is where I'm going to shift gears on you and tell you something that you probably don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how well you know the Bible.
Pretty well.
But we'll see. So, did you know that they discuss spagyrics in the Bible?
You got me there. No, I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. In the New Testament of all places.
Okay.
Most definitely. Remember when John the Baptist was taken prisoner?
Yes.
Okay. And he's down in his cell. And Herod Antipas, I believe it was celebrating his birthday upstairs. And his stepdaughter, Salome, is dancing for him. And she dances for him only if he promises her to give him only if he gives her what she wants. What does she want? She wants the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter.
Right.
Okay, well, what does that have to do with all this? It's a dead head on a silver platter. In other words, it's the beginning of an alchemical process at a full moon, because a silver platter represents a full moon. Wow. So it's the beginning of the alchemical process, spagyrics. And it continues through the crucifixion of Jesus, where we have our spiritual transformation. But it begins with the execution of John the Baptist.
Oh my God, I've never thought of it that way before. That's mind-blowing.
As Paul Harvey would say, and now you know the rest of the story.
And God bless Paul Harvey. We love that guy. That's incredible, because this is something that is interwoven, I think, in all of these ancient texts and a lot of these rituals and texts of secret societies, is that there's layers and layers and layers of metaphor. It's a multi-dimensional experience. There's nothing linear about it. You can get value from the linear information, but when you really start to break things down multidimensionally, that's where the Pandora's box of all the enlightenment codes and the metaphysical information come into play.
Exactly. And they were very steeped in allegory and metaphor.
Right.
Because they can take a simple phrase and depending on who the audience was and how educated they were, how steep they were in understanding the ancient traditions, is the message that they could take away from it. And the Bible is a prime example. I just shared one, aspect of allegory with you. There's many others, but allegory is throughout the Bible, and there's many, many layers. It's not just this, the moral stories. There's a lot of information there about sciences, astronomy, music, but you have to understand, where all this is coming from in order to be able to say, oh, yeah, there's an additional message in here that I've missed, just like I shared.
Yeah. So do you think that these metaphors and allegories were placed there as a form of self-initiation, meaning when a person reads it literally, perhaps they live their life and expand and grow, have spiritual experiences, and they go back and that's there for them to extrapolate when they raise themselves to that vibration, where they're able to process that data? Is it a form of self-initiation where it's there to activate humans through millennia and throughout history?
I don't know if I would say it's strictly self-activating. Part of it, is, for those that have gone through some of the ancient mystic schools, or mystery schools, where they have been educated and are able to recognize these different layers. It's all a matter of understanding. And, well, let me digress for a moment. I'll put it to you like this.
Okay.
Within Freemasonry, we have what's referred to as the 7 liberal arts and sciences, okay, which are grammar, rhetoric, logic, or dialectic, mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. Well, the first 3 of these, which are grammar, rhetoric, and logic, or dialectic, are referred to language. Language is the foundation of all our understanding. Okay? And it's a progression that we're dealing with here. The language aspects of the 7 liberal arts is referred to as the trivium because it has 3. Okay? Grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Right. 3 of them. So within that, we have to understand what words are, and not just the meanings that we think of today, but what are the archaic definitions? What is the history? What is the etymology of that word? Some of the archaic uses of it. And I'll give you an example here. One of which is master. When you hear the term master, it's like, oh, that's someone that is in charge.
Right.
Okay. He's the master of a lodge. He's in charge of it. Right. He has a Master of Arts degree. That means, or he's a master mason. In other words, they've attained a certain level of knowledge, skill, and ability. But master has another meaning that's very archaic. In other words, it's something old and out of use.
Right.
That folks don't think about. Not regularly anymore. Are you familiar with the actor Russell Crowe?
Of course. Yes, he played in Gladiator and has been in several movies, actually.
Keep going. There was one that had a ship in it, right? What was that called?
Oh, Master and Commander.
Oh, my goodness.
I remember.
Master is an ancient way of referring to a navigator. The master was in charge of getting the ship from point A to point B. And he had certain working tools. He had compasses. He had a plumb to measure the depth, okay, the horizontal depth. He used straight edges, to go from point A to point B. He also uses what in navigation today they term as dividers. Masonry recalls them compasses, but used to inscribe arcs and circles, and to measure from point A to point B. So a master is also a navigator. And he wasn't necessarily the captain of the ship. And that's why in that movie, Russell Crowe is referred to as the master and commander, because he was both the navigation officer and the captain of the ship.
Ah, so then master almost takes on a shamanic connotation, because it's not necessarily the leader, but the moral and ethical guidepost, you could say, the compass.
That's right.
So you did yourself have an experience with a shaman that came into your life, as you talk about in your book. Since we just talked about that, tell me about this person named Charles and how that affected your life.
Well, for most of my life, I was dealing with the Western aspects of occultism, esoterica, however you want to phrase it. They mean different things, but that's how folks understand it, as synonymous, even though they really are. So, it's very structured if you're dealing with Hermeticism or Vedic science. Very, very structured, okay? Which means that it's masculine in its application, that it is very left-brained, okay? I'm pretty sure I got that right. Masculine is left brain, feminine is right brain. Okay. Pretty sure I got that straight. So, I'd been doing this most of my life, and I had done very, very well. And I got to this one point to where I plateaued. And it seemed that regardless of what I was doing, I just couldn't move any further. So about that time, I had become a master mason, had just been raised up. And I had always had this affinity for nature as well, but I never related the two, my love of nature with this occultist background. It just didn't come to mind. So I was involved with a birding club, and a nearby town was having a migratory bird festival. So myself and several other folks were out looking for places where visitors could find good birds. We were given a lead to go visit with Charles and see if we could get permission to take some folks up to his place to, if they had any good birds. Well, ultimately, yeah, he had some good birds and he agreed to let us bring some folks up. And he resided at the top of a mountain, and I resided in the valley right below, which was kind of interesting. And he said, well, since we're neighbors out here in the country, being on the mountaintop and down in the valley, that's close enough, he said, well, why don't you come up, and visit? Well, I did that. And we shared this common love of nature. And that's how it actually began. We would just go, walking across the mountain. It was very rugged, a lot of underbrush, lots of rocks. And, we would just talk about, plants, about the different animals, the weather, the stars, all sorts of stuff that was just very nature oriented. And that's really how it began. And little by little, he would send me off on tasks to do. And they didn't seem like very, important at the time, but, it would just build up. And ultimately, these led to actually going on vision quests that were, I'll just say, quite inexperienced.
So when did he reveal his shamanic aspect to you? Was it while you were on these walks looking at plants? I know you detail a lot of that in your book, which is incredible, but when did he really let you know that there was something supernatural going on?
He never really did.
Oh, wow.
It's just something we didn't talk about. Uh, we were just two guys, two friends that enjoyed being with nature up on the mountain. Uh, we didn't talk about ourselves at all, aside from the first day that he told me his dad had been a Mason, but he wasn't. And he had seen my ring, recognized that I was a Mason. He said, Masons are good people, but you have a lot to learn. That was classic Charles. But yeah, we just never really talked about it. We talked about nature. It was just kind of all part of one thing. It just seemed very natural, as things had evolved there as far as what we were doing. He was teaching me. I thought I knew a lot about nature when I went up and talked to him, the first time. And because I did know quite a bit about, nature, plants and animals and things. But as we were walking along, he'd point out a plant, many of which I knew, many of which I didn't. He would begin telling me about the plant, about its uses, how to recognize it during the different seasons. Right. And sometimes, stories about these plants that, how, like, for example, corn, and why they were important, or stories about maybe the cedar tree, and why it had a red center in it. So this is how he was communicating. He was using nature to teach me. And when he would send me out on a little task to go do something, it's not something I would generally question. I might not understand it, but, I was learning. So I didn't really ask why I had to go do something. I just went and did it for that learning opportunity, that learning experience.
Sure.
And it was never anything that was formal or structured. It's just, whenever I showed up, it's okay. Hey, great. You're here. Let's go for a walk. He just stopped what he was doing. And that's what we would do. We would go walk the mountain.
So essentially, you had this training with Freemasonry. You had made it through the Blue Lodge, the 3 degrees. You had been raised as a Master Mason, and yet there was another layer of information, this natural layer that was coming to you through Charles to help you on your own evolution.
Exactly. And what I found later on, and again, when you're going through this process, it is in and of itself a learning experience. Oftentimes you don't recognize it for what it is until it's much, much later. Right. But what I've found out, what I learned here is that the shamanic training, being nature-based, was feminine oriented. It was very fluid. It didn't have the Western structure to it.
Right.
So what it enabled me to do was to find this union of opposites, this third pillar that we often refer to, the Zohar. Okay. And within that, you find that, okay, you get, when you have the union of opposites, the union of the masculine and the feminine, and it comes together, it creates this divine spark.
Yes.
From which something else that is greater can grow. And that's what happened here. Having that shamanic experience, came together with my Western background and enabled me to bring it together and become something greater than I was before.
Oh my God. So these are universal laws, principles in play, showing up in this way, this masculine energy, this feminine energy coming together to give birth to a new version of you. You adapted that information. And like you said, you grew and evolved. And that's also part of the Philosopher Stone. That's part of the crux of what the Philosopher Stone is about.
It's all about transformation, about metamorphosis. Yes. And part of what makes it difficult, that is painful, is not understanding it.
I know it's hard.
We can have physically or mentally challenging experiences that we perceive as or potentially, painful where we're burning something off. But sometimes these lessons are coming to us and we don't recognize them for what they are until much later. And I'll share something with you about knowledge.
Okay.
Knowledge comes to each of us from many places and in many ways. When we have the eyes that see, the ears that hear, and a heart that understands and appreciates and recognizes it for what it is, when we are duly and truly prepared, the knowledge will come. In that regard, I didn't go and seek Charles out as a teacher because I knew that I needed a teacher. I was prepared in my heart. I was open to it. And once I was able to see and to hear and to appreciate what he had to offer, then that knowledge came to me. That's when the teacher came to me. There's often this mistaken conception that, or I should say, it's a misconception that a student must go and seek the knowledge or seek out a teacher. But it's actually the opposite is true. When the student is ready, the knowledge will come. When the student is ready, the teacher will be there.
Absolutely. And that is caused, you could say, by integrating new information. There is an action that needs to take place. You don't necessarily want to seek out the teacher, but you want to have a desire to learn and grow. And that desire will set up an attractive force that will attract the information. And then when you integrate that, you raise your vibration, and then you attract the teacher, much like the mystery schools of antiquity. That is how they received their students. They never went out and recruited people. When the people were ready, when their energy, their personal vibration was resonating in such a way, that's when they ended up where they were supposed to be.
Yes.
Oh, it's very powerful.
Yeah. Again, that's the way it always has been. Whether it's, in Western occultism or Eastern mysticism, even within, Native American cultures, you're recognized for what you are. It's pretty straightforward. And that's where folks get frustrated, I think, when they embark on this quest, is they become so laser focused on it. They're trying so hard that they miss out on the opportunity because they don't see it. And I'll share a little story along that line if you don't care.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
One early on, when Charles and I were up on the mountain, one of the first lessons that I had with him is we'd been up there walking around most of the day, pretty high elevation, lots of scrub brush, around, and a gazillion rocks, right? We're never on a trail or anything. We're just always going cross country. And we're out in the middle of nowhere, about 4,000 feet up. And he takes his walking stick and he points at a rock. And he says, lift that rock up. There's a snake that lives under there, and I want to talk to him. And I'm like, yeah, right. Here we are in the middle of freaking nowhere, a gazillion rocks all around us. And he's telling me there's a snake under this one that he wants to talk to. Okay. So, I had my doubts. I lift the rock up, and lo and behold, there is a snake under it. And he reaches down and he picks the snake up, and the snake wraps around his arm. And he looks at the snake, he says something to it, and then he thrusts it out in front of me. And he says, is it a boy or a girl? Hell, I don't know. Get it out of my face. Right. And so, he's looking at it, and he says, look at this. He's got a forked tongue. He doesn't know if he's a boy or a girl. He doesn't know a truth from the lie. He doesn't know right from wrong. It's no wonder he's got a bad temper. He's confused. He's nice to me right now, but maybe he'll change his mind in a moment and bite me. But he says, even with all that, with his bad temper, the snake is wise. The snake is knowledgeable. Yes, he likes to hide under things, or he climbs trees and hides in bushes, but the snake is knowledgeable and the snake is wise. If you don't look at him directly, you won't scare him. And if you don't scare him, if you just kind of look at him sideways, he can show you which path to take. And with that, Charles said something else to the snake. He set it down. We watched it slither off out of the corner of our eye. And a few minutes later, we went in the direction that the snake went. And that's how we can go about solving problems. Sometimes we become so intent, so focused on what is in front of us that we miss the opportunities. We have to be open-minded and say, okay, if I can't hit this thing head on and solve it, and I'm banging my head on this wall, maybe if I come at it from a different direction, I can find a way in. If I can't get through the front door, maybe there's a window of opportunity.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. And it really lends itself to the concept of multidimensionality. Information is different on different layers and different dimensions. In third dimensional reality, in a linear sense, you might process that snake as, like you said, a traditional snake, but he was able to look past that, get that other set of information that exists in those planes, and then adapt that to that situation. It's really, really powerful. I love shamanic stories.
Well, when you think about it, okay, well, what does a serpent represent? A serpent represents knowledge, wisdom, healing, immortality. It has a lot of symbolism there. But at the core of that lesson, it was duality. It was a lesson in duality.
Interesting. And also, like you said, using your higher intellect, your spiritual self, to interact with something that will guide you. Something as simple as a snake can actually guide your life in a path in the correct direction.
Absolutely. We can go so far by ourselves as individuals. But when we team up, partner with someone else or something else, okay, when we lend ourselves to a collaborative effort, we can go much further, much easier than we can if we try to go it alone.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's really what teamwork is about.
Oh, absolutely. I'll relate this story to you. One day I was contemplating why human beings only have two hands when it would be really nice to have a stabilizer, like that third hand to hold the box. And then later that day, I needed help turning this wheel, this water wheel. Several people joined me and they all put their hands on the wheel and we all pulled it together and turned the wheel. And that made sense to me. I was like, okay, it's because we are supposed to unite. And you talk about in your book how the author Meyer, suggested that by changing our thoughts and deeds as individuals, humankind's collective soul is influenced and changed. And that's a powerful thing, because that work that we do, it may seem very localized, like we're doing it on ourselves, but everything's interconnected. We're all one. So it reflects out, it ripples out and changes the universe.
Absolutely. But, what I was trying to share in that is that, again, the Western thought was very structured and, without realizing it, limiting. And what I was able to do. And it wasn't until I was able to experience the nature-based shamanic application of it, and merge that, unify those two opposites, that I was able to actually really move forward. But it took, that, how should, because it was radically different from anything I had expected,
Right.
But it was being able to recognize it for what it was as a learning opportunity and then apply it. And that's what I'm trying to share in the book. Yeah, we go through in the second portion of the book the operative mechanics of the Philosopher's Stone, meditation, and all of that, from a very formal, structured way of looking at it from, for example, a 16th century alchemist. And then I flip it on you in that last portion, with when I relate, my shamanic experiences. And the reason I do that, and the reason that it works, is that we find that by blending together, it provides a greater understanding. So that, yes, we've had this acquisition of knowledge, and now we know how to actually use it. We can apply it to our lives in a daily manner.
Yes, I did love that about the book as well. And I loved how you modeled it actually after the 3 degrees of Freemasonry. You separated the book into 3 parts, like you were saying, because you have a very long history with Freemasonry. Can you tell me about that a little bit? Let's talk about that just a little bit here.
On both sides of my family, men have been Masons for many, many generations. So, there's a bit of a legacy there that I have to carry on. I don't think of it as anything, important. It's not that big a deal.
Right. But you do feel like it is one pathway for people to experience kind of the mysteries, the mystery school knowledge.
It really is. But you have to accept it for what it is at face value. There are wonderful learning opportunities available through Masonry. And the way I look at the lodge is it's this huge library, like the Library of Congress. There's tons and tons of information in there. The reason I went to lodge was to learn. The reason many go to lodge is for the social opportunities, the interactions. And some go because they want to get recognition, have a sense of purpose, have some influence, to get, degrees and awards. So, it's just kind of like going to church. The question I would pose is, when you go to church or synagogue or mosque, are you going because you want to learn, to pay your respects to deity, to God? Are you going there because you like the people? Or are you going there because they have a nice spread of food after service?
I think it's different for different people. And I think that most people do not go there for the learning, which is the crux of the whole experience.
And that's where they become misguided. They say, oh, I don't like going to this place of worship or that place of worship. When, what it boils down to is they may not agree with, the religious leader, whether it's a pastor, a rabbi, or an imam. They may not like the people that are in the congregation, or maybe the food just sucks, but my point is that the reason that you go to church, the reason that you go to lodge, is for the message. It's to learn. The leadership, the people, the food, the social activities should have absolutely nothing to do with the reason that you're there. You have to go for you and what you hope to get from it.
And it almost seems like 1% of the participants, you could say that about every religion and things like Freemasonry, maybe 1% of the people are actually there with that intention.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, Richard, that it seems like 99.9% of all the ancient mystery school information, the Enlightenment information, is out there in the world in books and websites, and people have been writing about it for hundreds of years. It just seems like there really isn't much that's exclusive at this point.
Well, for heaven's sakes. Yeah, they get hung up on their secrets, and that's all well and good. But, just to tell it like it is, very, very few Masons today know what the secrets of Masonry are. They get caught. They just don't know, and that has become a real issue with membership in the fraternity. The average age of a Mason right now across the board is somewhere close to 70. It's right at 70 in the death zone, dude. Life expectancy for a male is roughly 77, 78 years old. So what does that tell you? If the average age is 70 and the life expectancy is 78, that's not looking good. And the numbers are declining. They're dying off. Why? Because they're not replacing those who are dying with younger people. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I think one of the reasons is these older brothers, bless their hearts, they have good intentions. They really, truly do. They're good men. But they're set in their ways, entrenched in their attitudes, beliefs, and values, and they don't understand esoterica. They don't understand occultism. Their emphasis most of the time is biblical morality, and that's what they're going to try to explain questions with, because that's what they relate to. They relate to the Bible, and it's got to be, the answers have to be in the Bible, or you'll end up receiving, existentialist philosophy based on human nature. In other words, they're just guessing.
Right.
And that's really what it boils down to. So, the issue with the membership is they're not able to engage and captivate a younger audience. And the younger audience is really, really hungry for, this occult and esoteric information. They really are. So what happens? Oh, in 2004, 2005, we had two great movies that came out that were wonderful opportunities to improve membership within the fraternity. And I'm talking about the Da Vinci Code,
right,
and National Treasure.
Right.
There was a lot of interest. Folks are going to the theaters, they're seeing these great movies. They've got tons of questions. So a lot of young guys asked the Masons, yeah, I'd like to be one. I want to learn the secrets. I want to be like, Robert Langdon there in the Da Vinci Code, or Nicolas Cage in National Treasure, finding all this stuff. And the brothers, again, we're talking older gentlemen, and their response was, oh, well, the Masons aren't a secret society. We're a society of secrets. Okay, that's cool. If I join, I'll learn the secrets, right? Well, yeah, right. So a younger guy will join, goes through all this process of becoming a member. It takes months. And he goes to lodge, and he finds out, once he gets raised up and has gone through the degrees, it's a business meeting. There really isn't any education and training. they'll have maybe a 5 minute education spiel sometime during the meeting, but it's really not imparting any knowledge. There's nothing of substance there. And here you've got this younger guy. He's in this fraternity with these guys are 2, 3 times his age. And they no sooner get out of the meeting than they're going down and get something to eat. And they're talking about stuff this younger dude, can't relate to because, it's 30 to 50 years, disconnected from him. So there's this huge disconnect. After a couple of meetings, the younger guy is saying, wow, you know what? I'm not getting a good return on my investment here. My time is limited. I'm already working 2 jobs, or my wife and I are both working. I've got kids. I'm not spending any quality time with my family. I can better use my time doing something with my family, or at least something that I personally am getting a benefit from. The dues keep going up and up. And I can take and save that money. I'd much rather take, $100 and take my wife and family out to dinner somewhere, or maybe spend a day at a beach, have a good time, get some quality time, then waste it, with these old farts. And that's the conundrum.
Yes, I can see how that could be a hindrance in attracting the younger generation. But the Freemason situation is that it stretches back hundreds of years into time immemorial. And because of that, there is a lot of value there. But if people don't know about it, in this age of people being inundated with information constantly, if they don't know about it, if they're not aware of it, it doesn't matter if they're the same frequency or not. There's a lot of distortion out there that's blocking it. So it's like they may be the right frequency, they may be attracted, but they're not going to find it because of the sheer oversaturation of media, of things that are vying for their attention.
Yeah, exactly. And they get caught up in these secrets, as far as what their rituals and things are all about. Well, number one, they don't understand them themselves. They get very caught up in rote memorization of the catechisms, of the actual performance of a ritual, the actions that you're performing as these little skits are going on, or rote memorization of the lectures themselves, and that's all well and good. But the issue is that the meaning of the degrees, the meanings of the rituals, why are they being performed, and the meanings of the lectures have been lost. They're just going through the motions. And what complicates matters is that the rituals and lectures, the way things are done, vary from one Masonic jurisdiction to another. Whether it's from one state to another, or one country to another, they change. Compounding that, you have very well-intended grand lecturers who are responsible for the conduct of the degrees and the rituals and the lectures. And as well-intended as they may be, they'll say, well, for whatever reason, we're going to make a change in the wording. Okay, it may seem minor, or we're going to make a change in the way something is done. Well, there are issues with that. Number one, when that occurs, regardless of intention, it further differentiates the jurisdictions. And that can lead to division, and dissension, and competition, saying, okay, this jurisdiction, is doing it the old ways, they're better or worse than this jurisdiction over here, which has changed things, modified. But really at the heart, the concern when those alleged minor changes happen, and they continue to accumulate from one grand lecturer to the next over many, many years, is that the meaning, the original meaning of the ritual, the lecture degrees, is getting buried. It's becoming distorted and further lost. So they're not doing themselves any favors in making even the smallest nuance of a change. Because if you understand the trivium, understand the words, which is the first and most important portion of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, is when you begin changing those, you're changing the meanings. And as we, how should I phrase that? Not compound. As we expand on that, the meanings just become buried and further changed and lost.
And that was the original intention, is the allegorical and metaphorical meaning. If you start changing the script, you lose that. And there is a magic, you could say, in that original design. There was some very intense thinking, and a lot of actual human energy went into designing that, the spiritual energy. And I could see why that could be an issue for sure. But really, it just seems like Freemasonry is a valid place to find information, but they have to adapt. The 21st century is changing very, very rapidly. The modes, the methods, the techniques of engagement have just changed so much. It's almost hard to keep up. Are you practicing right now? Are you still a practicing Mason, or have you moved on?
I've moved on. But to address what you have, mentioned about the adaptation, I have heard stories, or at least that there are ideas of changes that are forthcoming. Hopefully, maybe the use of video games. I don't know how effective and impactful that might be. To have a video game about the Templars or the Masons or whomever. What quality of a candidate are we really looking at deriving from that kind of a background?
It's an interesting concept to even think about. Some sort of Freemasonry recruitment style video game, or just giving people the information. That's really what's missing. I think that people just don't know exactly what it is, and that it's even there in the caliber that it's there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the reason, I wrote this book is, I had these questions, I had concerns. And as I mentioned earlier, if I had these questions and concerns, folks such as yourself and your listeners, you have them as well. And I think that we need to put them on the table and look at them for what they are, and not try to make them something that they are not, and address them and say, okay, what does this mean? What is it? Where is it? What are the roots of it? Where is it coming from? Really, what is it about? That's what the secrets are. It's not necessarily going to be found in, some religious dogma somewhere or philosophy. As I said, philosophy is great. It's really good for asking questions, but philosophy does not provide answers.
Right. But your book, like you said earlier, it does provide some answers. And I do want to tell people where to find this, because this book is absolutely amazing, and it does break things down in such a way that you're going to grasp these core, very foundational concepts. So this book that we're talking about, it is the Alchemical Search for the Unified Field, Pythagorean, Hermetic, and Shamanic Journeys into Invisible and Ethereal Realms. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it anywhere that books are available. And I know, Richard, that we can go on for hours. I feel like we're so similar. I just actually didn't even look at the time. I was just locked into this conversation and realizing that we've gone quite a while. So before we take a break until the next time that you're on, can you leave our audience with something? Can you tell them something that they can take with them and then also go check out your book?
Okay. Well, first of all, they may want to check out my website. It's just recently published.
Oh.
It's stonedtemplar.com. And that is stonedtemplar.com. And I'm on my Facebook author page is R.E.Kretz. So if you go on Facebook and you do a search on R.E.Kretz, I should come right up. And you should recognize the mugshot here. But anyway, I would say that if I want to leave you with something memorable, is ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And more than that, I would tell you to be a heretic, because a heretic is someone that asks difficult questions that make those in power very uncomfortable. And that's why they receive that moniker. And if you're a heretic, expect to also be persecuted, because that's what happens. Folks in power, folks that have influence, don't like to be made uncomfortable. So dare to ask questions, dare to know thyself.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And also, don't be afraid of the answers, because sometimes the answers aren't going to be what you expect. So you ask the questions, you might think you know what the answer is going to be, but then it shows up in a different way.
Absolutely. And just remember, if you're on this quixotic quest for the answers, okay, and you're jousting with windmills, just remember, Don Quixote rode an ass.
Well, thank you for that, Richard. StonedTemplar.com, the alchemical search for the unified field. Incredible interview. Thank you so much for being here, Richard.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'll look forward to coming back, Jake.
Oh, it's going to happen. Believe it. It's definitely, obviously, you're writing another book. We got a sneak preview, so we're definitely going to have you back on. So yes, everyone.
Excellent.
Check out that website. Check out the book. Richard, please hold through the outro music. And everyone, my God, what an episode. We took the deep dive, the unified field, alchemy, so much more, Freemasonry. And we'll see you next week. Midnight on Earth.